I drove 6 hours continuously, and snow was still melting off my coat when my son opened the front door just wide enough to look at me and sigh. Behind him, warm Christmas lights glowed across the hallway, and I could hear laughter spilling out from the dining room, while I stood there holding the pecan pie Martha had spent all morning baking. He glanced once at the gifts in my hands before saying quietly, almost embarrassed, "Dad, you really should have understood the hint. We're keeping it family only this year." Martha never came to the door. I stood there while the smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey drifted past me into the cold, like I had shown up at someone else's house by mistake. Before I go on, take a moment to subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Your presence here helps me keep telling stories like this slowly and honestly, without rushing past the quieter moments most people pretend not to notice. And now, let me return to that Christmas night, standing on my son's porch while the snow kept falling around me. For a few seconds after Ethan spoke, neither of us moved. Snow drifted quietly across the porch, settling over the shoulders of my coat and the red ribbon wrapped around the pie dish in my hands. The porch light above us cast a soft yellow circle onto the steps, warm enough to make the cold feel even sharper outside it. Ethan kept one hand on the edge of the door, like he was already halfway through ending the conversation. Behind him, I could hear Christmas music playing somewhere deeper in the house. Soft piano. Familiar songs Martha used to hum while decorating our tree years ago. Plates clinked together. Someone laughed loudly near the dining room. For one strange moment, it sounded exactly like every Christmas we had spent building that family together. Then I noticed the small silhouette moving across the hallway. My grandson. He ran past wearing the little green sweater Martha had mailed to him 2 weeks earlier. I saw him stop briefly near the staircase, probably hearing my voice, but before he could turn fully toward the door, Ethan shifted his body and blocked the view behind him. "Dad," he said quietly, lowering his voice as though he was afraid someone inside might overhear. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." Harder. The word stayed with me longer than it should have. Not cruel. Not unfair. Not wrong. Just harder. As if the difficult part of the evening was not an older couple driving 6 hours through a snowstorm, hoping to surprise their family for Christmas. As if the burden belonged to the people standing safely inside the warmth instead. I looked past him once more. The dining room lights reflected against polished glass cabinets Martha had once helped choose when Ethan bought the house. I could smell roasted turkey, cinnamon, melted butter. Real warmth. The kind that fogs windows and makes strangers feel welcome. Yet somehow, all of it stopped at the doorway. Ethan finally reached for the pie dish still sitting in my frozen hands. "You can leave this," he said gently, avoiding my eyes. Not, "Come inside." Not, "Stay a while." Just the pie. And somewhere behind him, the laughter continued while snow gathered quietly at my feet. The car felt too quiet once I pulled away from the house. Not because there was nothing to hear, but because everything I expected to hear never came. No footsteps behind us. No call to stop. No, "Dad, wait." Just the soft crunch of tires over fresh snow, as I guided the car down the empty road, headlights cutting through the falling white like a narrow tunnel back into a life that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. Martha sat beside me without speaking. Her hands were folded in her lap, still holding the faint warmth of the pie dish she had carried all the way to that door. She kept looking straight ahead, the way she always did when she was trying not to make my pain heavier than it already was. I should have turned the radio on. But I didn't. Because silence was already doing the talking. And somewhere in that silence, the past started coming back. Not all at once. Just pieces. A mortgage statement I signed without hesitation when Ethan said the bank needed help. Just temporary, he had told me. I remember nodding before I even finished reading the numbers properly. A phone call during layoffs years ago, when he sounded exhausted, uncertain about keeping the house. I wired money that same evening without asking what went wrong. Not because I had it to spare, but because I couldn't imagine my son sleeping under stress I could ease. Christmas after Christmas, I used to tell Martha we didn't need much for ourselves. I still see her wrapping gifts carefully at the kitchen table, writing names in her neat handwriting, making everything feel fuller than it actually was. We never talked about the retirement savings much. We just adjusted. Postponed things. Delayed plans. Told ourselves there would be time later. There is always later when you're thinking about family. And every winter, when storms hit harder than expected, I was still the one driving through them. Not because anyone asked me to anymore, but because somewhere along the way, it became normal. Expected. Quietly assumed. I didn't think of it as sacrifice at the time. It just felt like being a father. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in steady rhythm as snow gathered again on the glass. Each sweep felt like it was trying to erase something that wouldn't go away. Martha finally spoke, softly. "We did what we could," she said. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was harder than that. We didn't just do what we could. We did more than we should have. And somewhere in that difference, a line had been crossed so slowly over the years that I never even saw it forming. The road ahead was empty. And for the first time that night, I realized something simple but heavy. We had spent a lifetime making sure our family never felt alone. Only to end up driving home from their door in silence. My phone vibrated again while I was still parked on the side of the road, headlights cutting through the falling snow like they didn't belong to anyone anymore. For a second, I thought it was Ethan. Or maybe Martha checking if I was okay after everything that just happened. I picked it up without thinking too much. It wasn't Ethan. It was a message that had come through too fast, like someone had meant to send it somewhere else and didn't realize it had landed in my hands instead. I read it once. Then I read it again, slower this time. Unbelievable. She really thought she was welcome. The words didn't change. But the meaning did. Not because I misunderstood them, but because there was nothing left to misunderstand. I kept staring at the screen, my thumb resting just above it, not scrolling, not responding, just holding the moment in place as if it might correct itself if I gave it enough time. Martha didn't ask what it was. She just sat there, looking straight ahead at the snow-covered road, her hands still folded, as if she already knew that whatever I was reading didn't need to be spoken out loud. Inside the car, the heater kept running. Outside, everything stayed frozen. And between those two worlds? I didn't say a single word. We pulled into a roadside gas station because neither of us said we should keep driving. The car rolled to a stop under a flickering light that buzzed faintly above the pumps, throwing pale yellow across the snow-covered asphalt. I left the engine running for a while, just listening to it idle, like it was the only thing still doing its job properly. Inside the car, the heater hummed softly. Not warm anymore. Just noise. Snow kept building up on the windshield in thin layers, melting slightly where the defroster tried to fight back, then freezing again at the edges like even time had given up trying to move forward. Martha sat beside me in complete silence. Her hands were still folded, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the glass, as if she was looking through the gas station instead of at it. She hadn't spoken since the message. Neither had I. That was the strange part. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was something slower than that. Heavier. I replayed the words again in my mind without touching the phone. Unbelievable. She really thought she was welcome. At first, I tried to place it. Who said it? When? Why? But the more I thought, the less it felt like a mistake. Because mistakes have hesitation in them. This didn't. This had certainty. A tone that didn't come from surprise, but from judgment that had already been decided long before I arrived at that door. I looked out through the windshield at the empty pumps. No movement. No customers. Just the wind pushing loose snow across the pavement in slow, careless lines. And then it hit me. Not all at once, but in pieces that finally connected in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. The door wasn't closed in a moment. It had been prepared. The silence at the porch. The way Ethan avoided my eyes. The way no one came after us. The way my grandson disappeared behind the hallway before I could even be seen properly. None of it was random. It was coordinated. Like I hadn't walked into a family Christmas, but into a place where my presence had already been discussed, weighed, and quietly removed before I even knocked. The heater kept humming. Martha still didn't speak. And in that quiet gas station parking lot, with snow covering everything slowly and evenly, I finally understood something I wasn't ready to understand at the door. We hadn't been turned away. We had been expected to leave. I didn't speak for a long time after that. The gas station lights buzzed faintly above us, casting a tired yellow glow over the snow-covered windshield. The engine was still running, but the car felt like it had stopped being part of the world outside. Just a small, warm box sitting in the middle of something cold and indifferent. Martha remained still beside me. Her breathing was calm, but I could tell she wasn't asleep. She was simply waiting. The way she always did when she knew I was trying to make sense of something without saying it out loud. I looked down at my phone again. The screen brightness felt sharper now. Less like a tool, more like a decision waiting to be accepted. My thumb hovered for a moment before I opened the banking app. Not because I was uncertain, but because I knew once I started, there would be no emotional way back into the version of myself that kept everything intact for the sake of peace. The first thing I saw was the mortgage account. It sat there quietly, automatic, like it had been part of my life for so long it no longer required attention. A routine. A responsibility I never questioned because it was tied to family. Ethan's home. His stability. His future. I opened it. The details loaded slowly, line by line, as if even the system was reminding me what I had carried without complaint for years. Then I stopped the autopay. There was no sound. No warning. Just a simple confirmation that felt too small for something that large. I stared at it longer than I expected to. Not because I regretted it, but because I was realizing how long I had been the invisible structure holding up something that no longer acknowledged its foundation. My finger moved again. Utilities next. Electricity. Water. Heat. The small invisible comforts that made a house feel like a home. All of it had been running under my name at some point, then slowly extended, assumed, continued without discussion. Like support that had turned into obligation without anyone noticing where the line had moved. I removed them one by one. Not quickly. Not emotionally. Just carefully. Like someone correcting an error they had tolerated for too long. Martha shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes still closed. I think she felt the change in me, even if she didn't know what I was doing. She never asked. That was her way of letting me carry what needed to be carried. Next came insurance. The kind of thing no one thinks about until it disappears. Health coverage. Protection. Safety nets built quietly over years of responsibility. I had kept them active long after they stopped being necessary for me, because in my mind, they were never about me. They were about them. I paused for a moment longer this time. Then I ended it. No alarm sounded. No immediate consequence appeared. Just a quiet confirmation that something had been detached. After that came shared credit access. This one felt different. Not because it was harder technically, but because it represented something less visible. Trust that had been extended so far it had stopped being discussed. I reviewed it slowly. Account names. Permissions. Linked access. Years of quiet financial overlap that had blurred the distinction between support and dependency. Then I removed it. No hesitation in the system. Only mine. The ski trip booking came next. A family reservation. Paid in advance. Planned months ago during a time when conversations still felt like they included me naturally. I remember Ethan sounding excited when he mentioned it. That memory passed through my mind briefly, but it didn't change what I was doing. I canceled it. Instant confirmation. No resistance. Just absence replacing expectation. The final item took longer to open. A business guarantee I had once added without hesitation when Ethan needed backing to move faster than his own foundation allowed. At the time, it felt like support. Like guidance. Like something temporary. I read through it again slowly. Every line now felt heavier than when I had signed it. Then I removed it as well. And just like that, the structure I had quietly built around their lives began to disappear piece by piece, not violently, not dramatically, but with a calm precision that didn't require emotion to function. I didn't feel triumph. Or satisfaction. Only something clearer. Something sharper. Like seeing a system for what it had always been, not what I had hoped it was. Outside, the snow kept falling without interruption. Inside the car, nothing reacted. But I knew that somewhere ahead, far beyond this parking lot, those small quiet decisions were already beginning to move. The first call came before I even put the phone back down. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. Once. Then again. And again. The kind of urgency that doesn't come from confusion anymore, but from consequences arriving faster than someone is prepared to accept. I didn't answer immediately. Not out of punishment. Out of clarity. Martha was still beside me, her eyes open now, watching the snow move across the windshield in slow, uneven patterns. She didn't look at the phone. She didn't need to. When I finally picked up, Ethan's voice came through too fast. Not controlled. Not measured. Broken into pieces. "Dad, what did you do?" I stayed quiet for a second longer than necessary. Not because I didn't hear him. Because I was listening to how quickly fear replaces confidence when comfort disappears. "What are you talking about?" I asked calmly. There was a pause on the other end. Then the words started spilling out. The heating in the house had stopped working. The payment system had changed. Something about accounts being locked. Cards declining at the restaurant. A ski reservation canceled without explanation. A notification from the mortgage office that didn't make sense to him. Each sentence carried less control than the last. Not anger. Panic. The kind that comes when someone realizes the ground they were standing on was never fully theirs. I didn't interrupt him. I let him finish. Let the silence stretch after his voice broke off. Only the sound of the heater in the car filled the gap between us. Then he asked again, quieter this time. "Dad, why?" That was the moment everything narrowed. Not into anger. Not into revenge. Into something much simpler. Truth. I looked forward through the windshield. Snow kept falling like it always had, indifferent, steady, patient. And I finally spoke. "My name was on things you stopped seeing," I said quietly. Another pause. He tried to respond, but I didn't let the conversation drift into excuses or confusion. Because this wasn't about systems failing. It wasn't even about money. It was about something that had been building long before tonight. So I said it. Slowly. Clearly. Without raising my voice. "I wasn't angry because you closed the door." A pause. "I was angry because you made your mother stand outside it, pretending not to notice." The line stayed in the air after I finished it. Heavy. Unmoving. On the other end, there was no quick reply. No argument. Only silence that felt longer than anything he had said so far. And for the first time in the entire night? I wasn't waiting for his answer. We didn't go back that night. Instead, I found a small roadside motel a few miles down the highway. Nothing familiar. Nothing symbolic. Just a simple place with warm yellow lights in the windows and a sign that flickered slightly in the wind. The room was small, almost bare. A bed. A chair. A heater that actually worked without needing permission from anyone else. Martha walked in slowly and sat on the edge of the bed without looking around much. She placed her hands over her knees for a moment, then finally let out a long breath she had been holding since the house. I made coffee from the small machine in the corner. It tasted burnt and too strong, but neither of us complained. There was no need for perfection anymore. Only quiet. I handed her a cup, and she wrapped both hands around it like she was holding on to something real again. Outside the window, snow kept falling under the glow of the parking lot lights. Cars passed occasionally on the highway, their headlights stretching across the dark like brief reminders that the world was still moving forward somewhere. But inside that room, time felt slower. Martha leaned back slightly, pulling a thin blanket over her shoulders. For the first time that night, her face softened, not because everything was solved, but because nothing new was being taken from her anymore. I sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her more than anything else. It struck me quietly, how different warmth felt now. Not the warmth of a house full of voices and expectations and carefully maintained appearances. This was smaller. Quieter. But it didn't ask anything from us. There was no door to stand outside of. No laughter behind glass we weren't meant to enter. No silent decisions being made without us in the room. Just two people sitting in the same space, finally not being measured by anyone else's comfort. Martha took a sip of coffee and looked at me for a moment. Not with questions. Just recognition. Like she understood that something had ended without needing to name it. And for the first time that entire night, the silence didn't feel like exclusion. It felt like rest. Weeks passed quietly after that night, the kind of weeks that don't announce themselves with change, but slowly replace everything that used to feel urgent. We stayed in a smaller place now, away from the noise of expectations. Days began to feel lighter, not because life became perfect, but because it stopped asking us to perform in it. Martha settled into a slower rhythm. Morning tea by the window, short walks when the weather allowed, resting without guilt. I could see something returning in her that I hadn't noticed was missing until it came back: ease. I fixed small things around us. Nothing important in the way I used to define importance. Just simple, ordinary living. A routine that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Ethan called sometimes. Not often at first. Then occasionally. I never answered immediately anymore. Not as a statement. Just because I no longer lived inside urgency. When I did pick up, the conversations were shorter. Less noise. More pauses. I could hear the distance between what was said and what was understood. But I didn't rush to close it anymore. I also didn't rush to fix it. One evening, Martha sat beside me while the sun dipped low outside our window. The light was soft, almost fading into gold. She didn't say much. She rarely needed to. After a while, she quietly said, "It's calmer here." I nodded. And it was. Not empty. Just, no longer shaped by other people's expectations. I thought back to everything that had happened, the snow, the door, the silence that followed, the decisions made in the dark of a parking lot. It all felt distant now. Not erased. Just no longer pulling us backward. And in that stillness, I finally understood something I hadn't been able to see when everything was loud. For the first time in years, we stopped trying to earn a place inside our own family. We simply existed again, without asking permission to do so. If you enjoyed this story, take a moment to like the video, and subscribe for more, and leave a comment. Your support truly helps these stories continue.